So Vasyl Lomachenko just retired this week. He's an all-time great, a Hall of Famer, and he's had quite an illustrious career. So without wasting any more time, I've made very similar videos on my channel already. Check them out before or after this video. To go over the criteria briefly once again, I've rebranded the A+++ tier to the S tier because it's a lot easier to say. Each fighter Lomachenko has fought in his pro career will be sorted into a category, which will more or less reflect the quality of his opponents at the time of the fight. Before we get into his pro career, I think it's important to mention how good and illustrious his amateur career was. 396 wins and 1 loss might be the best looking amateur record of all time. He does have a case to be the best amateur boxer of all time, period. He won a gold medal in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, as well as the 2012 London Olympics, won gold in the 2009 AIBA World Championships, gold in the 2011 AIBA World Championships, and the one guy that beat him in the amateurs, Albert Selimov, Lomachenko avenged that loss twice. Starting his pro career, Lomachenko had his debut against 25-3 Jose Luis Ramirez. It's important to mention that even though Lomachenko had all that amateur experience, most amateur standouts don't take a 25-3 opponent in their first fight. Ramirez was a reasonably respectable name on his record. Ramirez was coming off a win over former title challenger Ray Bautista, but in fairness did lose his next two after Lomachenko by stoppage versus Abdamares and Oscar Valdez, so I think mainly because of the Bautista win, Ramirez goes in the B tier. Then Lomachenko takes on Orlando Salido in his second fight for the title. Obviously, I'm not going to count a loss on someone's resume, but I think context is necessary for Salido. It's easy as a new fan to look at Lomachenko's record, see that he lost to a guy with 12 losses and say that he's not that good. But Orlando Salido is a nightmare opponent in so many ways. Salido was the defending world champion during the fight. He previously knocked out Juan Manuel Lopez twice. He was an extremely rough, relentless pressure boxer. Not only that, he missed weight versus Lomachenko, so he clearly had a size advantage, and Loma kept getting hit below the belt, but the ref couldn't see it. Even then, it was still a very close split decision, so it's not too much of a stain on Loma's record. Then Loma takes on, in my opinion, the hardest opponent of his entire career, Gary Russell Jr. I think Russell Jr. is one of the most underrated boxers of the past 10 years. In his prime, he was such an incredibly talented boxer who was more or less held back by injuries and inactivity. He had some of the fastest hands in the sport, knockout power, great footwork, blistering combinations. He wasn't the champion during the fight with Lomachenko, but he was in position for a vacant title fight, and after losing to Loma, he came back the next year and won the title versus Johnny Gonzalez, and proceeded to hold the title for another 7 years, defending against the likes of Oscar Iskandar, Jojo Diaz, Kiko Martinez, Tugstort Nyambia, only losing his title in 2022 by majority decision to Mark Magsayo, a fight in which he dislocated his shoulder in the first 2 rounds and proceeded to go 12 rounds with only his left hand, and even won some rounds versus a dangerous Filipino puncher. Russell was an extremely talented boxer, 24-0 at the time, and could have had an even better legacy without the injuries. Lomachenko beat this guy in his 3rd fight, and in my opinion it's the statement win on Loma's record. Russell is going to go in the A++ tier. Loma was now a world champion, and he took on Chonlatan Piriyapinho, better known by his real name Surya Tatakun. Piriyapinho is a classic case of a Thai boxer. 51 wins and 1 loss, looks extremely impressive, but like almost all boxers from Thailand, they fight almost exclusively in Thailand versus journeyman opponents or debutants. The first time he fought outside of Thailand, he lost to Chris John. But in fairness, his record wasn't as padded as some other Thai fighters, and he put on a decent account of himself versus Chris John, so I'm going to put him in the B tier. Then Loma takes on Gamaliel Rodriguez. Rodriguez was actually on a decent winning streak at the time. He'd just beaten Orlando Cruz, the same guy who went to a draw versus Lamont Roach in 2018. Rodriguez was 25-2 at the time, a respectable opponent. He goes in the B tier. Then Loma takes on Romulo Komosicha. Not really any good wins on his record. All he really did at that point was lose to Lee Selby. Komosicha goes in the C tier. Then Loma takes on Roman Martinez. Martinez is actually quite an underrated name on Loma's record. Martinez first won the title back in 2009 versus Nicky Cook, beating undefeated Diego Magdaleno, and prior to the Loma fight was coming off 2 fights versus Orlando Salido, the first fight being a win, the second fight being a draw, and Martinez was the defending WBO world champion at super featherweight for Loma's first fight in the division. I think on principle, by being the world champion in a new weight class, Martinez is an A tier win. Then Loma takes on his physically most dangerous opponent to this point, Nicholas Walters. This was actually a time where Walters was seen as a world beater, being the first and only man to knock out Nonito Donaire. Then schooling an undefeated Miguel Mariaga. Walters was the former WBA champion at 126, and Loma would make him quit as he normally does at this point of his career. Walters was seen as a very dangerous puncher and a dangerous test for Lomachenko. For that reason, I think he's a step above being a typical world champion, and I'm going to put Walters in the A+. Then Loma takes on Jason Sosa. Sosa most recently went to a draw versus Nicholas Walters, as previously mentioned, but that fight really shouldn't have been a draw. But Sosa was pretty good. He went on to beat an undefeated 32-0 Javier Fortuna. I think Sosa belongs in the B+ tier. Then Loma takes on Miguel Mariaga. Mariaga was alright, nothing special. He was coming off a loss to Oscar Valdez, but had a decent account of himself in that fight. I'm going to put Mariaga in the B tier. Then Loma takes on Guillermo Rigondeaux. This one's a bit interesting. Just to clarify, Rigondeaux at 118 is one of the best fighters that division's ever seen. If it was a win over Rigondeaux at 118, it'd be either an A++ win or an S tier win even. Rigondeaux was such a skilled, technical, talented defensive boxer, but obviously 130 is not his weight class. He had to jump up from 122 to 130 to face Lomachenko, and the size difference was pretty obvious. I will say though, the size difference wasn't comically ridiculous. Lomachenko wasn't that big of a 130 pounder anyway. Obviously I can't put Rigondeaux in the A++ tier like he normally would be at 118, but I can settle for the A tier. Then Loma moves up to 135 to face Jorge Linares. Linares has been a bit hit and miss throughout his career, but in that particular stage in his career from 2013 to 2018, Linares was a really good opponent, had 2 wins over Anthony Crolla, a win over Luke Campbell, Mercito Hesta. He was also a very dangerous puncher, and the first fight where we really see how undersized Lomachenko was at 135. I think as an opponent by himself at the time, Linares would be A tier, but because of the size, and this was Loma's first fight at 135, I'm going to put Linares up one spot in the A+ tier. Then Lomachenko took on Jose Pedraza. Pedraza was a 2-time world champion at this point, won the title versus Andrei Klemov, lost to Gervonta Tack Davis but then came back, moved back up and beat Raimundo Beltran for the world title. I put Pedraza as an A tier win in the Tack Davis resume video, and he's going to go in the A tier again. Then Loma takes on Anthony Crolla. Crolla was on that border between British and world level. Had a great upset win over Ishmael Barroso. Had a decent account of himself versus Jorge Linares and beat Ricky Burns. I think he goes in B+. Then he takes on Luke Campbell. Similar situation to Crolla. Campbell was actually a gold medalist in the Olympics. He was a decent enough contender. He's going to go in the B+ tier again. Then Loma loses for a second time versus Teofimo Lopez. Loma comes back and faces Masayoshi Nakatani. Nakatani was coming off a very close fought loss to Teofimo Lopez and one of the best fights of the year versus Felix Verdejo. Nakatani was a tricky opponent, especially because of his range. He's going to go in the B+ tier again. Then Loma takes on Richard Comey. Comey was actually a former world champion, but one of the weakest champions we've had in recent memory. He was a strong, dangerous puncher, knocked out Asa Chaniev for the vacant title, followed by a knockout versus Jackson Marinez. He also did get sparked by Teofimo Lopez. I'm going to put Comey again in the B+ tier. Then Loma takes a year off and faces Jermaine Ortiz. Loma was really favoured to win this fight at the time, but it's aged even better since then. At this point, Ortiz was coming off a win over Nahir Albright. Also former champion Jamel Herring. He also arguably went on to beat Teofimo Lopez at 140. Not to mention he's just very tricky in general. Some of the lightest footwork in boxing. He's a big opponent and he performed quite well for himself versus Loma. Even though Ortiz never became champion, I'm going to put Ortiz in the A tier. Then Loma loses again to Devin Haney. Obviously most people are going to say Loma was robbed, but I don't think it was a robbery. It can go either way. Then in Lomachenko's last ever fight, he takes on George Kambosos Jr. Kambosos probably is boxing's worst ever unified champion. His accolades do not reflect his quality as a boxer. He should have lost to Maxi Hughes. He's very lucky that Teofimo Lopez fought like an absolute fool in that fight. He's going to lose very badly to Richardson Hitchens. I think he goes in the B tier. Anyway, to overview the criteria and the achievements, no S tier wins, 1 A++ win in Russell Jr., 2 A+ wins Nicholas Walters and Jorge Linares, 4 A level wins Roman Martinez, Rigondeaux, Pedraza and Ortiz. I think compared to the other resumes I've reviewed, he doesn't quite have the portfolio that Canelo or Inoue does, but he does have quite a good strength of schedule. Realistically, he didn't achieve that much that stands out among all-time greats, but he's probably done the most in the least amount of pro fights out of anyone in history. Winning a title versus a guy like Russell Jr. in your third fight, I think really demonstrates Lomachenko's greatness. I would have loved to have seen him fight Tank Davis back in 2017, 2018. There's a reason Tank Davis avoided the fight. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Goodbye.